Hello and welcome to Media Watch on Hunger and Poverty. I'm your host, Bill Schickler, and today we're very honored to have an organization called Results here, which does anti-hunger, anti-poverty lobbying, one of only 2 organizations in the country that, through their tax status, is able to do anti-hunger lobbying. And so with us today is Meredith Dodson, who is the domestic legislative head of the group Results. Meredith, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Bill.
So Meredith, tell us a little bit about this group Results. It does lobbying. Is this a lobbying group like for Exxon, or tell us a little bit about what is Results?
Well, it's very, very different from the lobbying that most people think happens in our political system. The real lobbyists of Results are volunteers, and they live in 100 different communities all over the United States. They directly lobby as volunteers, as constituents. They directly lobby their own members of Congress, and then they also and they work with the congressional staff, and in addition, they also generate media coverage to highlight issues of hunger and poverty, and they organize other people and educate other people in their communities. But they walk into an office, it's much different than the kind of fancy dressed lobbyists that many of us think of. They're advocating for society's most vulnerable, whether we're talking about children here in the United States or around the world.
Okay, you're the head of the domestic part of Results. But just to give our viewers a little taste, they also cover international issues. Maybe if you could briefly just describe some of the things that Results has taken up as actions they want to have accomplished.
Yeah, so we really look at poverty and hunger and look at how can we address the root causes of hunger and poverty in the United States and around the world. And within that, we then look at the issues around health, education, and issues of creating economic opportunity. On the health side, internationally, we've been very active in pushing the fight against tuberculosis. TB, many of us think of as long-ago disease, but it's actually a huge killer of people all around the world. It's the #1 killer of people who are HIV positive, and yet TB could be treated at a very small cost on a local level, but we haven't always seen the resources to do that. So that's an example of the kind of global health issue we work on, is we do advocacy to support the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. And then another health issue we work on internationally is fighting for vaccines and the programs that within the U.S. foreign aid budget provide that are called the child survival accounts. So making sure that children have access to vaccines, the kind of life-saving stuff that literally often costs 10 cents or $2, that is killing millions of children all around the world. And we've seen progress in this area, but it's still well over 20,000 children are dying every single day of preventable diseases or malnutrition or other preventable causes.
Okay. On our program, oftentimes we say, well, we don't want people to just be whining and saying, oh, woe is me, you know, this is terrible, what can I do? So just to start with, if a person wanted to join Results, what would be some of the first steps? And then secondly, can you sort of give us a feel for just how these meetings go on with Results? How do you have to go to the meeting every other night, or you know, do you have to have a high income, or just give us a feel of how we can get in touch with the organization, you know, and to figure out whether we want to be part of this group.
Great. Well, we as I mentioned, we have chapters in 100 communities across the country. So many of your viewers are probably folks, there's probably a chapter nearby. But the best way to find that out is to go to www.results.org. And under About Us, you can find a whole map of our local chapters. So, and if we don't have a chapter locally, you can get on our email list no matter what. You can take action with us online. You know, we have those very kind of quick and easy actions where you click and put in your zip code, and it helps you directly send an email to your members of Congress or to your local media. But what's unique about results is we take folks beyond that. And so kind of what the local chapters are doing is most of our chapters meet either once or twice a month. Typically, they get together on the second Saturday of every month because we have a national conference call. So all the chapters are together, usually around some kind of speakerphone, listening to the call. It's about an hour long with the kind of guest speakers, anything from members of Congress who talk about here's my perspective on what's happening on Capitol Hill and how to work effectively with a policymaker, or a Head Start parent who says, let me tell you what this program has meant for my family and the difference I've seen for my child, or the kind of cutting edge researchers who can tell us what's happening in the areas of public health. So we have this conference call that also includes training on how to talk about the issues, the kind of reviewing talking points, learning those talking points so that folks can pick up the phone and talk to a congressional aide, or even better, meet with a member of Congress face to face. And that's the kind of, once that conference call ends, our groups are doing meeting to do strategizing about the actions they're taking. And on average, every few days, a results group is sitting down face to face with a member of Congress while they're back home to say, we are voters, we're constituents, and these are our priorities, and giving them very specific, tangible things that Congress can do that can make a big difference, whether that's programs in the foreign aid budget or the kind of investments in child care for low-income working families, like the Head Start program, like child care assistance, and many other issues. So what happens in those meetings is there's a lot of planning, and then there's a lot of doing. So the kind of what's unique about results is that the organization takes folks beyond. I know many of us have probably signed petitions or done kind of basic stuff online, but results takes people beyond that to the kind of actions where you really get to a member of Congress, educate them, inspire them about making a difference. And the research shows in terms of feedback from members of Congress that those are the kinds of things that make a big difference.
So basically, it's one meeting a month where you go to where you get together at a telephone, a speakerphone, and you hear from these experts on health, on poverty, and you get some information, then you learn how to speak that information to your member of Congress or to the media. So.
And I will say that many of our chapters actually get together a second time over the course of the month to kind of coordinate the other things they're doing. Our DC results chapter, because I'm a volunteer in our local Washington area results chapter, we typically do, we'll get together, it'll be potluck, have food, drink, and do letter writing together and kind of brief each other on issues and what's been happening. So sometimes it's just once. I would say it's probably 50-50 that some of our groups are getting together just one meeting that month or two meetings a month. But anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
And so the action that you take is usually most basic in the form of writing a letter to your member of Congress, mm-hmm. or to a letter to the editor or some other kind of media outlet. That's one of the basic actions that you're going to end up taking as a result of joining this organization.
Right, and we provide the talking points, but the more that, no matter what issues you care about, for folks who are listening, I urge you to personalize any communications. When you're communicating with a policymaker, it'll make a big difference. So we'll do talking points rather than a form letter that everyone writes the same thing.
So do you have to have $1,000 to join this organization, or?
Well, we certainly, of course, like most nonprofits, we'd welcome anyone with $1,000, but no, it's really, it's what results is a way for folks whose resource that they can give, maybe it's 2 or 5 or 10 hours a month, is their time. And that's a very precious resource, because that's, being an engaged citizen is what gets policymakers to listen.
So it's actually theoretically possible that even if there's not an organization in your community, if you got the phone number for this conference call, which is once a month, that you could be part of that conference call in your own home.
Yeah, and but what we'd really want to do is kind of work with you to kind of help strategize about, all right, so who is your member of Congress? What are you going to do with that information once that conference call ends? You know, what ways can we train and support you? And we have a whole system of training people on how to get involved. We have a very basic level of training that is called the basics, and they're available as a podcast, as audio files, or as kind of written documents about here's the basics of understanding a little bit about results and what influences Congress and how to speak effectively. On top of that, I'll just add, we have a whole resource on our website called the Activist Milestones. It's an activist toolkit. And that has literally 45 different types of actions you could take to influence policymaking. Anything from a basic, how do you write a letter, or how do you get an editorial or an op-ed in the local paper? How do you organize a forum about an issue you care about in your community? Organize a site visit for a program that you're involved in, and we walk you through the process on how to do that based on the experience of results volunteers. So there's a lot of resources to support people to be taking action. But yeah, it's very easy to get plugged in.
Okay, sometimes I hear about different organizations and they say, join us and do this and do that, and I think, well, what is your track record? What have you been successful in? I understand that Results Domestic has had quite a sterling accomplishment in terms of increasing funding for Head Start. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the success you've had in spite of the Tea Party's wrangling about cutting spending.
Yeah, so Results, the organization has been around for over 30 years, and initially started with a focus on international hunger and poverty issues, but then 30 of our chapters now focus on U.S. poverty issues and have been engaged for a long time in advocacy to support early childhood development. So looking at the ages birth to 5 and the kind of critical investments that we can make then that actually for us as taxpayers saves us money in the long run. And one of those critical investments is the Head Start program. So that's a comprehensive preschool program for low-income children and their families. Most of the participants are ages 3 to 5, but there's actually early Head Start that serves infants and toddlers, often through kind of home-based, a home visiting program. And we were very successful 10, 12 years ago through the years in pushing for increased investments in the Head Start program, and then also pushing back against efforts that could have really undermined the Head Start program by reducing the program's kind of guarantee of the high quality and comprehensive services. There was an effort to block grant the Head Start program. So instead of actually requiring Head Start services to be kind of a range of things that also include nutrition and health screenings, dental screenings, mental health services, there was an effort to just kind of switch it to a block grant where you just give the money. Congress would say, okay, states, you're in charge. We'll just give you this money and let you decide. And Results was instrumental in pushing back against that idea and ultimately defeating it in Congress. And then over the last, just this year, in 2011, yes, it's a tough time, of course, for our volunteers and for the few of us that are on staff to be doing advocacy, urging Congress to increase funding for any programs, even though we know that they make a big difference. But because of the kind of work that Results volunteers did, along with many others, of course, in directly communicating with members of Congress and in generating media coverage, et cetera, we were able in the final 2011 spending deal, remember this was a deal that actually got decided right before the stroke of midnight, the government was going to shut down, and instead, in a deal that actually cut $38 billion total from government spending, we got an increase in funding for Head Start to make sure that no children lost access to those services, so no kids were cut off, over a $300 million increase. And just to actually catch us up to speed for right now, here we are in September. Congress is deciding the 2012 spending levels for these various programs. And just this past week, the Senate committees of jurisdiction that get to decide funding levels actually, again, increased Head Start's funding so that in a tough budget climate when actually a lot of other programs were getting cut, Head Start will again be able to serve the same number of kids next year under those funding levels in the Senate.
And that's democracy at work at its best.
Yeah.
Maybe there's so much things to talk about. Maybe you could give our audience a little idea of the nature of poverty amongst children here recently, with some census figures that came out recently.
Yeah, every year the census, the U.S. Census Bureau does an analysis of poverty. They first come out with a national level analysis, and that came out at the beginning of September. And then this past week, they came out with state and even county level data. And I think unfortunately, it's not surprising, but this recession, this economic downturn is having a huge impact on children and on families. Over 40 million Americans are considered below the poverty level. And what that is $22,000 a year for a family of 4. And there's many places that's nowhere near actually what the cost of living is once you factor in the high cost of housing, cost of food, et cetera. And what's really distressing for me, and in part this is distressing for me because I'm the mother of an almost 3-year-old, is that 1 out of every 4 American kids under the age of 5 is living in a family that is in poverty, living in a family that's making $22,000 a year or less. And when we think about not only the short-term kind of the impact on our economy in the short term of having so many Americans struggling to make ends meet, but also the next generation. What is that going to mean when young children, today's young children, haven't had the kind of adequate nutrition, have had to forego doctor's appointments because their families couldn't afford it? What is that going to mean when they're kind of the next generation's workers? I'm very concerned about what this is about. But one thing I'll say actually on the flip side, some of the census data that came out actually did show us where programs are working. So the Census Bureau doesn't, they have a certain way they calculate poverty, and they don't necessarily factor in all of the different kinds of programs. And so there is something called the Earned Income Tax Credit, or EITC. It's a tax credit specifically for low-income working families. It's really targeted at single moms making about minimum wage, something like $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year. And the Earned Income Tax Credit alone in 2010 lifted 5.4 million Americans above the poverty line. And half of those are kids. So at the same time, the census data actually shows us where government programs are working when we're making the kind of smart investments. And the SNAP program is the other one that really...
SNAP stands for?
And SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's the food stamp program, what many of us know as food stamps. Of course, it has nothing to do with stamps anymore. It's it looks like a debit card. That program lifted well over 3 million Americans above the poverty line. And more than half of the participants in the SNAP program are children. So again, there's glimmers of hopes. You can see when you break down this data, you can actually see both how big the challenge is when we're talking about 1 out of every 4 young kids being in poverty, but also where investments are making a difference.
And I don't know if it's still called WIC, but there's something like WIC that also has been under the knife.
Yeah. The WIC program is a nutrition program for women, infants, and children. So that's where you get the WIC part. And this is where, typically this is a program that has strong bipartisan support. It's recognized that, again, if you make sure kids and pregnant moms and young children, very young children have access to nutrition in those early years or early months, really, what a huge difference that makes later on. And in the past, Congress has all come together to make sure that all the folks who are eligible for this program get the services. But, unfortunately, there's a lot of policymakers who are looking to slash investments kind of all over the place. And that includes some pretty deep cuts that were passed within the U.S. House of Representatives in the summer to the WIC program. We're really hoping, of course, that the Senate doesn't follow their lead, and there's been a big public outcry about that. But that's one of many issues that I hope the folks, your viewers, will take action on. And again, you can take action at results.org.
12 people, and it's supposed to make decisions on the budget. In our brief amount of time, should people who are part of results contact like Chris Van Hollen, who's one of these 12 people?
Yeah, so really you have 12 members of Congress, 6 from the House, 6 from the Senate, tasked with finding over $1.2 trillion worth of stuff to cut in between now and Christmas. And really they have to make those decisions between now and early November in order for it to move through Congress. I absolutely urge everyone to be in touch with their members of Congress. Ask your own members of Congress to be weighing in, and in particular that any of these deficit reduction approaches do not harm low-income people and are done in a fair and balanced approach, because we cannot balance the budget on the backs of our most vulnerable.
Well, Meredith Dodson from Results, I want to thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And we're going to be doing another show here immediately. We'll get into more details about some of this legislation. So I'm Bill Schickler with Media Watch on Hunger and Poverty. See you guys again real soon.